Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Learning a new set is quite the process of memorizing new champions, synergies, and mechanics. Today we'll be easing that learning curve by providing 10 tips for learning a new set. We're aiming this at players who are relatively new to TFT and haven't had as much experience with previous sets, though there's potentially helpful tips for veteran players as well. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Our first tip coming in at number 10 is to take your time learning the new set. There is a lot of information to take in when a new set comes out. Even veteran players have difficulty piecing together everything right away and need time to learn all of the new abilities, traits, and mechanics. So for newer players, take it easy. Don't rush in expecting to memorize everything right away. Getting familiar with the set should be the first priority, especially game mechanics that you're unfamiliar with. The new mechanic for set 5 is a lot to take in because the shadow items essentially double the current available items. For newer players that are still learning the base items, having even more added can be overwhelming. So again, our first tip is just to take it easy and take your time to learn everything. Expanding on the previous tip, coming in at number 9 is to look up the patch notes when a new set comes out. In general, looking at patch notes should be a habit that players should pick up because it's important to know what's being changed. Specifically, when a new set comes out, the patch notes will be extensive and have a lot of useful information for players. Things like new mechanics being introduced, important balance changes they've done from the PvE to live, or what items they've reworked. All of that information is usually available in the patch notes. Of course, you're still going to need time, especially for newer players, to process all that info. But at least having it available is useful to occasionally check back in to double check specific pieces of information. We also recommend you continue to check out every patch after the first one if you're someone that regularly plays TFT. But if not, at the very least, everyone should check out the first patch notes of a new set. Patch notes are certainly useful, but they don't always tell you all the information you may need to know, which is why our number 8 tip is to use online TFT resources. Once a player's looked up the patch notes, the next step is, what? Well, for some, it's diving right away into a game. For others, you may want to look up additional information because oftentimes the patch notes leave out a lot of specifics. Whether you're diving into a game right away or waiting, we recommend looking up online resources for TFT. And there's a lot of resources that you can look up, multiple websites including GiantSlayerTV, Reddit, LolChess, Mobalytics, and many other websites can provide a plethora of information that's useful to you prior to playing a game or have to open up during a game so that you can easily look up what you need. Unsure of what to play for your first 2 games? Look up a build to get an idea of what's being played. There's always a lot of new guides being posted when a new set goes live from players that spend a lot of time playing the PvE. At the end of the day, how you go about learning a new set is up to you, but online resources are a great way to ease the information overload. Let's take that last tip one step further with our number 7 tip, make or find cheat sheets. Cheat sheets in this context are considered condensed pieces of information pertaining to a specific part of the game. Champion trait cheat sheets are quite common, for example, and help a lot for double checking what you're playing in the game. For set 5 specifically, it's going to be helpful to have cheat sheets for the new shadow items since there's quite a lot of them to learn. If there's none available for what you're looking for, making a rudimentary one is quite simple. Find the information you're looking for from other sources and splice it together in a format that works best for you. Whether that's just a quick guide of how to make certain items, or even just the cost of a champion. That's the great thing about cheat sheets. They can really be anything that you need. Short guides for builds can also be a useful way to use cheat sheets. There's quite a few you can likely find online, but if you're making your own, just look up what other players have been playing and toss in a few of the champions and what items they had. From there, you can expand upon it more if you need, but even just having what champions to look for in a build and a few of the items is plenty for the learning process. Whichever way you want to use a cheat sheet is up to you, but using them is a useful tool for double checking information you're already in the process of learning. Our next tip is to watch streams, which comes in at number 6. Watching streams can be a great way for new players to learn. While we recommend higher ranked players, any stream that provides educational information is going to be useful. Especially for a newer set, it's helpful to have a broader perspective on what's being played. Players climbing up the ranks often are playing specific builds or ways that may or may not be useful for a newer player, but it really comes down to who you're watching. We also recommend when watching a stream to watch actively. Active watching means you're paying attention to what the player is doing at each step of the game. What champions are they prioritizing early game? What 4 costs are they using as their carry? Why they're making the decisions they are making is a lofty question, but asking it to yourself in the middle of another player's game can be a great way to gather information. Passively watching for entertainment is totally fine, but if your goal is to learn, you want to watch actively. Lastly, ask questions. In larger streams, it may be difficult because your question may not always be seen, but it never hurts to ask a question. Make sure you're presenting the question from a place of wanting to learn, and more often than not, if it's read, the streamer will provide an answer. We talked a lot so far about what you can do outside of the game, so now let's focus on a few tips of what to do when actually playing. The first of those tips, coming in at number 5, is to play normal matches before diving into ranked. It's tempting to immediately dive into ranked because it feels good to climb ranks, and at the beginning of the season, it's usually easier to climb because you gain more points per win. But if you're new or still unfamiliar with the set, we recommend holding off playing ranked for at least a few games. There's really no specific number of matches you should play before going into ranked, but give yourself a little bit of a buffer before doing so. One of the perks of playing normal games is that you can go a bit wild. Of course, we're not suggesting you don't play without a purpose, but a normal match lets you test out things you may be unwilling to do in ranked. Unsure of a specific item interaction with a specific champion? Go ahead and try it out. Maybe you really haven't seen a certain trait used that often. In that case, use it in a normal game to test it out. Use normal games as both a means of learning to get better at the game, but also picking up bits of information you're curious about that is difficult to willingly do in a ranked game. After a few matches of this, you may feel confident to play ranked, but if you lose badly, don't feel embarrassed about returning back to playing normal games. You are still learning, and as we said in the first tip, take your time. Our next tip comes in at number 4, which is to focus on 1 or 2 builds. There's a lot of builds players are testing when a set comes out. Some are better than others, and while it is good to look up what the top meta builds are, what's more important is focusing your time on learning 1 or 2 specific builds. They don't have to be the top meta compositions, they can even be C tier. The important part is you focus on playing them for learning. Let's address flexible play. Being able to play flexible is an important skill for TFT, specifically for climbing higher ranked. But for newer players or players still learning in the set, you really can't play flexibly because you don't have the knowledge base to work from. How will you know when to transition from one build to another if you don't have any experience doing so? The answer is to start from scratch. Pick a couple of builds, make a cheat sheet for them if there wasn't one available, and test them out. Play them for a few games, get a grasp on how they play, and then try another build. Or keep playing those specific builds until you're comfortable with them. This is also where playing normal games can be useful. Once you've learned a few builds, your basic knowledge of the game will expand, and from there you can begin to learn how to play more flexibly with your comps. Let's narrow down learning the game with our number 3 tip being the early game is the most important to learn. While all stages of the game are important, the early game is where most mistakes will happen that can cause a ripple effect throughout the rest of the game. So for learning a new set, if you focus your attention to the early game, tightening it up as best you can, you'll have a much easier time in other parts of the game. This tip does transcend past learning a new set, as working on improving your early game is one of the best ways to do overall better at TFT. Doing so will help you learn better economy management, how to play flexibly with strongest boards, and making smooth transitions into later stages of the game. Knowing what champions and traits do well early on can save you health and earn you more gold. This tip also ties into watching streams, specifically higher ranked players. Watch how they play the early game and try to emulate it as best you can. Actively watch how they approach their board and you'll learn enough to apply it to your own games. Of course, we want to make it clear that we're not saying to ignore the other stages of the game. They are all important to learn as well, but focusing on improving your early game will naturally lead to a better mid and late game. Alright, let's move on to the number 2 tip, which is to play with friends. We recognize this tip may not apply to everyone, as not everyone has friends that play TFT. In that case, you can skip this tip, but for anyone that has a friend or a group of friends that play TFT, it can be really helpful to play together when learning a new set. This can be done either by queuing up together or simply being in voice chat talking about the game. Actively discussing the game not only helps you be more engaged, it also provides other players' perspectives to learn from. It's also a great way to introduce newer players to TFT, as there is a lack of social engagement when playing TFT on your own. Playing with friends can ease that initial burden of learning the game. While this isn't always doable, it's certainly a lot more fun and engaging to play with others. And the last tip, coming in at number 1 for learning a new set, is that losing is learning. It is okay to lose. Sure, winning feels great, and in TFT, winning basically means going to the top 4 because then your number goes up afterwards. But winning is not as important for learning as losing is. Losing exposes flaws, makes you question your decisions, and ultimately leads to improvement. Losing can be hard. Believe me, we know. It's frustrating to place in the bottom 4 and can be discouraging. If you can learn to look past that result and instead think about why you lost, then losses will become a lot easier to handle. We recognize this mentality isn't going to be easy for everyone. Even pro players have difficulty accepting a loss. But if you can learn to take losses as a means to learn, you'll pick up a new set in no time, and climbing ranked after that will be a lot better. That's it for today's video, folks. We hope these tips are useful for all the new players being introduced to TFT for the first time with Set 5. And for the returning players, good luck and have fun on your ranked climb. Let us know in the comment section below what your process is for learning a new set and any additional tips you may have. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.